it's so easy to kind of compare yourself to what someone's doing on Instagram and how long they've been traveling and how many countries they've been to in X, Y, and Z. And I just really want to reiterate that like your experience is yours and it doesn't need to look like everyone else's. And even if it's a couple weeks out of the year and it's not full-time travel, or it is full-time travel, whatever it looks like, it all counts. Travel can look different for everyone and your experience is your own, and remembering that, because part of the anxiety can be comparing sometimes, and so not getting stuck in that trap.
That is today's guest, Dianni Hall. At 22 years old, she chose a one-way ticket to India over getting a master's degree, and that is a decision that led to 6 years of full-time travel across 30-plus countries, really shaped the subsequent years of her life. And probably in many ways, she could have never even imagined. And when you travel long enough, of course, you change, your interests change, and inevitably, the way you travel changes. It can evolve with you. And the chances are you've already experienced this in your own life, or perhaps you're considering some changes in the way you travel or how you fit it into your lifestyle. And that's why for this conversation, I thought it would be really useful to focus on some of the lessons Dianni has learned from her ever-evolving travel lifestyle. Some of the phases she's been through include the first-time solo trip to India, budget backpacking, freelancing as an entrepreneur to make travel more sustainable, adjusting to slow travel to explore fewer destinations more deeply, and eventually keeping travel and the aspects of travel as a core value while settling into a home base. We cover them all today. I know you're going to love it. Thank you for listening, and welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
You're listening to the Zero to Travel podcast, where we explore exciting travel-based work, lifestyle, and business opportunities, helping you to achieve your wildest travel dreams. And now your host, world wanderer and travel junkie, Jason Moore.
Hey, it's Jason here with ZeroToTravel.com. Welcome to the show. Thanks for hanging out, letting me bring a little travel into your ears today. This is a show to help you travel the world on your terms, to fill your life with as much travel as you desire, no matter what your situation or experience. And I'm so excited about this one. Dianni Hall is here. You can check out her website, whileshe'saway.com. We'll link up to it, or Instagram. She's got a great podcast. And we have a big announcement at the end of this one, as you'll hear. And I'll wrap it up with a wonderful quote tying in with the theme of today's episode. And I'll share some personal updates on the back end as well. And yeah, just a little bit of food for thought going into this year for you. So stick around for that if you'd like. Don't forget, we have a newsletter. It's free. ZeroToTravel.com/newsletter. Keep in touch off the pod. I know you got a lot of content coming at you from all over the internet and the podcasts and the apps and the things. But if you like what we do here and you want to stay in touch, try to respect your time, pop into the inbox once a week with some helpful travel stuff, small personal updates. Yeah, it's fun. We're growing a community over there. So feel free to sign up for that. For now, please enjoy my conversation with Dianni, and I will see you on the other side, my friend. Cheers. Are you a visualizer? If you're going to go into something like a big meeting or something like that, do you kind of take time to take a beat and visualize how it will go?
I try. I have found that that's been effective. I think as like a generally more anxious person, being able to visualize something and see myself do it well, or like see it go the way I want it to, and kind of gives me like confidence going into it. So I do practice that from time to time if I really feel like I need it. Yeah. That's a good question. Do you do that?
Yes, in a way. Well, I mean, I brought up visualization. I didn't know why I was bringing it up, but it turns out that maybe this episode is going to be about the listeners here visualizing perhaps the next travel chapter in their life. Because one of the things that really caught my eye about your story, and by the way, I should give you a formal introduction, Dianni Hall. Welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
Oh my goodness, what an honor to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Jason.
I'm so excited to have you, and you have a podcast that I was listening to and I really enjoyed, While She's Away podcast, which we'll link up to, and you have Instagram. People can connect with you there. Well, we have an announcement to share today, you and me, but we can table that. It's exciting. We'll kind of leave that to the end, but stick around for that. I know that's an unfair teaser, but that's what
We'll get to it.
podcasters do. We promise we will. And that's one of the big reasons I wanted to have you on, because hint, hint, I want people listening to get to know you, because they are going to be getting to know you a bit better in some coming episodes. Again, dropping multiple breadcrumbs there.
You're teasing the people.
The visualization thing, it strikes me that you've had this journey with the travel lifestyle where it's been a bit of an evolution, which I find is sort of a natural progression for a lot of people that are, let's call us travel junkies. Let's call us what we are, right? And so like the evolution of your travel lifestyle, I'm talking about you, Dianni, I'm talking about the listener, is in some ways, if you're a travel lover and you prioritize travel in your life, it's not just the evolution of your travel lifestyle, it's kind of the evolution of your life and how you're fitting travel into it and how you're prioritizing travel and making it a part of your life. And I think through your journey, there are going to be some big lessons to pull out here. And I wanted to start with what I'm guessing was a pretty transformative trip for you, your trip to India, which from my research was your first. Was it your first solo trip?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a big one. I mean, yeah.
it was a pretty big one. And it's funny because when I reflect on it and I talk to people about it, they're like, where did you go? What did you do? And I was like, I think I knew flying from New York to India in itself was a massive like first solo trip. So I had the wherewithal, I think, to be like, I'm not going to go to Mumbai or New Delhi. I went more south, which if you've been to India, you would know tends to be a bit calmer. Obviously, it still comes with all the like culture shock and differences, especially never having left the country alone. But it was definitely an easier entry, I would say, into solo traveling, going to south of India versus like the bigger, more hectic, chaotic city parts. But yeah, to backtrack a little bit and to share that story, I think like a lot of us had wanted to travel for so long, but it was more of like a figuring out how to do that. My first kind of exposure, I was raised very Christian and went to a private school, and one of my first trips, I was 14, and I went on a missions trip to Honduras, which is a totally different topic of things. But anyway, it shaped me for several reasons, because it was the first time I was experiencing being outside of the country, and we weren't allowed to contact our family for like 9 days. And we let them know when we arrived and when we left. And during that time, I was just so immersed. Like I remember like not even caring. And some of my friends on the trip being like, oh, I really miss my family. I really miss being home. Da, da, da. And I was just so enamored with like every aspect of being away. And I think from then it kind of opened up this like, oh, what else is out there? Like what else have I not seen? What else is there? And it just sparked this fire that I like couldn't put out. And so through college, I'd looked at study abroad, or I'd looked at doing the Peace Corps, different options, and nothing really panned out, just like expense wise or what I was going to do. And so after college, I was supposed to go get my master's at Rutgers in social work. I'd gotten into a program. I was ready to start. And I remember about 2 months before that program started, I had decided, actually, I'm not going to do this, and I'm going to spend some time saving money, and I'm just going to go backpack, and I'm going to go to India. Well, initially it was supposed to be a trip with my partner at the time to South America, but I had been saving money for a trip, whether it was South America or Southeast Asia or somewhere, and they hadn't. And so then that kind of not forced me, but I made the decision to like, instead of waiting for them, go alone. And I found at that time, of course, was definitely budget traveling. So found a workaway situation in India, and that was kind of the focal point. So I was like, where else can I go from there after that? And figured out the rest of my trip through India, Thailand, Vietnam, and Laos after that. But it was a transformative first trip, which obviously led me to traveling for the next like 6 years after that.
Wow.
So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that pivotal choice, should I go and do the master's or should I go travel? It's just amazing how the sliding doors work. The alternate reality, who knows? But
and I'd thought about that alternate reality so many times, because I was like, okay, if I had gone that route, I would have graduated at this point, and I maybe would have been 26 at the time or something. And I think when I was younger, it felt like such a lifetime, like, oh my God, so many years like dedicated to this program when I could be out doing whatever, which now upon reflection, it's like I could have done both. I could have done all of it. But I think it just speaks to how like desperate I was at that time to really get out. And I didn't want to waste any years not traveling. And so it was a pivotal, and to look back, it's like it changed the whole trajectory of my life, not doing that master's and deciding to buy the one way to India instead.
Choosing travel will definitely do that. Will change the trajectory of your life for sure. The trip to Honduras, the mission trip, you kind of alluded to. Well, there were some other things, but I don't want to get into it. And then you went, which I'm guessing is maybe related to religion or spirituality or something. I don't know, just a hunch. And then I'm thinking, I'm trying to put this together because then you took this solo trip and you didn't, go to Switzerland or something. You went to a very spiritual place. Was there some curiosity around, religion, spirituality? How did that tie into your journey?
That's such an interesting question. And I haven't had anyone ask me that before, but I love that. Like I said, was raised super Christian. And so the missions trip, and I think stepping away from Christianity as I came into my queerness, I realized there wasn't necessarily room for both, at least in my life. And Christianity seemed to like fit me less and less as I got older and discovered, that I'm queer, and wanted to lean more into that part of me and be authentically myself. But I did kind of transition from this organized religion that I'd grown up in into spirituality in the form of still believing that there was a higher power, whether you wanted to call it God or the universe or whatever the case may be, still finding an ability to connect with that. And I think I'd always had that ability to connect with that from when I was younger, but I thought it had to be contained in organized religion. And then obviously going into my own adulthood, realized that it could be just me connecting to myself and connecting to the universe. And so I explored more meditation and prayer and visualization that we touched on, and like all of these things in my own way. And I think my experience in Christianity was that this was the only way. We all are familiar with enough with Christianity to know that you have to ask God for forgiveness in order to get to heaven. And finding this path was kind of eye-opening of like, oh, I can still live a fulfilled, joyful life just with this versus that. And so funny enough, you are correct in tying it to that, because I ended up staying at an ashram in India that was the first 4 weeks, and where I was volunteering with a bunch of other girls. And we were waking up every morning at 4 or 5 a.m. to meditate and do yoga. And there was a shaman from Brazil who was there that we were kind of learning mindfulness from. And so I really kind of, I guess, dove the opposite direction. I don't know about opposite, but dove in a completely different direction of trying to come to terms with what is out there and what I am connected to and what that looks like, and did discover some of that in India where I was at. And so it was I think now looking back, a really beautiful through line of taking what I'd learned growing up and morphing it into what I needed it to be, and what I wanted spirituality to be for me.
Beautiful. So at that time, did your family know? Had you come out to your family?
At that time when I left to India, yes, they knew, because I was living with a partner, and I had been with her through parts of college and after college. And so they were already familiar with her. Coming out, funny enough, I'd never, I don't know how appropriate this is, but I had never actually formally came out. I was found out. And I think that changed things.
It's like, you guys know, we don't need to talk about it. We don't need to have a formal discussion here.
Well, my mother had always kind of been inclined since I was younger, even before I'd kind of realized she had asked questions. And I was like, no, what are you talking about? Later to find out that she was right. And my dad had kind of just found out. in other ways. And I will be honest and say, like, it was challenging for a while. There was definitely some issue around it, and maybe it would have been different if I'd had the chance to actually formally come out and have an open conversation with him. But with time, we kind of worked through some of that and got to a point where there's a tolerance and a knowing. It's the elephant in the room that's not really discussed a lot of the time, but he's aware and, still loves me, and we have a loving relationship, but it's kind of like a don't ask, don't tell sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah, that's tough. I'm sure for you with, family gatherings and things like that, you can be yourself, of course, but there's this, like you said, this elephant in the room that brings a certain energy, a certain sort of, I don't want to say repression with it, but I imagine it brings something to the table when you're interacting with your family. So I'm sure that's probably a tough situation.
Yeah, there's definitely a level of not full authenticity. Like, I think we all know what it's like when you're able to be in a space and be fully who you are and like feel like that's a safe space to do that. And not that I don't feel safe with them or with my family. It's just like this part of me, I'm aware that it isn't fully accepted, I guess. And so it's like, we don't talk about that, but in every other realm, I do feel safe and loved. We just don't address that. But there definitely is a level of, and that's something that I've spoken to other queer friends about, or like their experience. And there is a level of repression, or kind of like beating around the bush with certain things. But I have other family members that are loving with all parts of me. And I think that's the importance of chosen family that I think a lot of queer people have leaned into or found, when it's not always, you're not always accepted by your family, but you find the people in your life who love you and build community around them. And so that's been such a transformational thing for me while traveling, and also here now based in Brooklyn, and finding that too.
So you went, and the first thing was this volunteer gig at the ashram, and it was for a month, you said, right?
Yeah.
So coming out of that, I'm just wondering, maybe I'm fishing for some advice here. I'm sure you had some intentions going into that. For somebody that's going to embark on a journey that involves something like that, it doesn't really matter. I mean, spirituality can be this all-encompassing umbrella, let's say, whether it's an ashram or a monastery or whatever. You're going to have some experience that's tied to religion or spirituality in your travels, and you're going into it, maybe with some ideas. There's always this balance of, am I supposed to what am I supposed to work on here for myself? You know what I mean? Like, is it like that? Or is it just, what's your best advice? After having the experience, I'm just curious to hear what the internal experience there was for you. And I mean, you could talk about your day and, getting up early and all the things you had to do, but internally is where all the stuff's happening, for something like that. And then the sort of the advice in hindsight that, maybe not to yourself, but it's hard for something like that. You can't be like, well, if I could do it different, but you can't. Like, the journey is what it's supposed to be. But yeah, I just want to hear kind of maybe some lessons from that, or just some thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I think I'd went into it so open. I think travel in general can be a spiritual experience, because there's so much lending to your intuition if you're traveling a certain way. And I think that in itself, being able to quiet everything else enough to be guided by your intuition, or to really listen to it, or strengthen that muscle almost. And so here in this experience, what I was really focusing on, as I said, I was like, I'm a generally anxious person. So I think a lot of my work is learning how to manage and or like calm that anxiety and function through it. And travel's been a great lesson for that. But here specifically, working with the shaman, and a lot of it was around mindfulness. And so I didn't really go in with that focus, but it was what found me and what I needed when I got there, because that was what a lot of what he was teaching on. And we were taking, walks on the beach nearby and grounding exercises and meditation and all of these things that like I could have done maybe on my own, or like sat down and opened up the Headspace app and meditated in my room. But really being surrounded by other people who were working on similar things and being able to talk about, this was my experience with anxiety, or this is my experience with depression, or this is my experience with trauma, or X, Y, and Z, and kind of coming together. And so I don't know if there was necessarily like lessons. There was obviously tons of lessons that I learned, but I think going into it with just an openness and setting attention of like, I think mine was just, universe, like meet me where I'm at and guide me in what it is that I am meant to be learning. And then I found that along that path and in that way. And I think the lesson too is spirituality can find you anywhere on your trip, where it's like I have friends who've done the Camino and talk about their spiritual experience, or traveling different parts of the world, and it doesn't always look the same everywhere you go. But you can find that, I think, anywhere, depending on like the way that you're traveling. Like I said, kind of going into things with an open intuition and a little bit of like freedom and play, and that being willing to let the universe guide you, or setting an intention for something and seeing how it shows up on your path and on your travels is always a fun way to incorporate that spirituality. And of course, there's specific places to go if you're looking for more in-depth experiences. But yeah, things that I would do differently, the trip was perfect and everything I needed it to be at that time, but I think almost taking it a little bit more seriously. I was so young, and there was so much that I didn't know. I think I was 23 at that first trip, and so really taking aspects of this more seriously. Like, we weren't allowed to have our phones at all. And I think we were allowed to have them for a few hours on the weekend. And I remember like being young and kind of like annoyed about those things, or like, I mean, you're you're so young, and so of course you're like, I want to be able to text and my friends and these like little things. And I think I wish I'd allowed it to be as fully immersive as it was, and allowed myself to like be in it so fully, instead of focused a little bit on the distractions or what I was missing out on in some ways, if that makes sense. But yeah, once again, it was meant to be what it was. And I was so young at that point that like, not surprised that was what was coming up for me, honestly.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I think you're right when all's said and done, that I do believe the trip is what it's supposed to be in many ways, even though you could look back and say, oh, wish I did this or that. But maybe it's that reflection, that experience and the reflection on that changes the way you do it moving forward, getting that sooner than later, or who knows, these trips are so malleable, right? You could look back on it at some point and think this, that, or the other. And then, 3 weeks later, it's still impacting you, but in all these different ways. And so this led to you being a nomad. That's a totally different lifestyle. What you want to share a bit about what made you go nomadic? Was that sort of inadvertent, or did you just consciously say, I'm going to be a nomad, I'm going to make this happen? And yeah, I would love some advice for anybody listening who, most people probably aren't going to become nomadic, but maybe there's some people listening that want to take a gap year or take 3 months off from their job somehow to travel, like a long-term trip, even a few weeks, a longer trip than they've ever done before, and carving out time to travel. That is a different thing than living on the road. So maybe you can address some of that and speak to it through your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of explain how I segued into traveling full time, it was kind of accidental. And I was in Thailand and I'd met some friends, and one of them was talking. This is during the same trip. So yeah, okay. After India, I went to Thailand, Vietnam, and Laos. It was like a four months, that initial trip. And I do remember kind of like oh my goodness, my eyes have been opened. We've all been there where it's like, how do I
Like, do I have to
continue?
actually go home? I mean,
What
is that a
what do
thing?
you mean? Go home, go back to New Jersey and do what? Are you kidding? I was like, there's no way. And so I remember starting these conversations with different people. And I think this has that same through line of like kind of following your intuition, because it did guide me. I met someone who was telling me about their friend who'd done an English teaching assistant program in Spain, and that you could apply through the Spanish Ministry of Education. It was like all of these things about it. And they gave me the website that I could apply. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is going to be my next thing. I'd nannied for so many years. I have worked with kids. Like, I know English. I know some Spanish at that point. I could figure out how to do this. And so I traveled for those next 4 months, ended up coming back to the States because it was also around COVID. So luckily I got back home 2 weeks before the borders closed. During that time, I had already applied. Like, I'm in Thailand, I'm in Pai, and I'm typing out like my application, submitting it for this program. I get back to the States. I'm just kind of working and being there like we all were during COVID. In the interim, I get my acceptance letter, and then I figure out, because the only way at that point you could kind of leave the US was with a student visa. You weren't allowed to go anywhere on a tourist visa. And so I left on a student visa, and I was living in Huelva, which is a city south of Sevilla in Spain. And that kind of sparked the next leg of travel, which was teaching English, au pairing. And I can kind of get more in depth into that if you want. But just, I know most people, like you said, won't be nomadic, and it kind of isn't for everyone. And what I'm realizing now is like, maybe isn't for me. I think at that point I was like, oh, this is going to be the rest of my life. And then you kind of hit a point where you're hitting burnout, or you're craving stability or community. And I think you can find that in other countries if you decide to like post up and create a life there. But I think it can also be so glamorized, because there are so many barriers that come with that as well, of language barrier, of having to constantly renew visas, or all the challenges that come with like building community when you're not from somewhere. So it comes with a lot of its own things. But I've found like the few week spurts that I've done, whether it was the W Trek in Torres del Paine in Chile, or like different things, have been the most valuable for me. And so it's been just a matter of like making sure that I set up my work schedule to allow myself the time to take those trips, even if it is only like 10 days, at a time, or, it's a little bit longer than a week. Those really like intentional, planned out excursions that are like really meaningful have been the ones that I think have been I don't want to say the most impactful and discredit like all the other experiences that I've had while traveling, but can be so valuable. And it doesn't need to be compared to someone else's life of like, oh, I've traveled full time for like X amount of years. It's like your experience traveling is just as meaningful as someone who's done, years abroad backpacking.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a competition for sure. The program is a good example. You mentioned some of the things you did, au pair, teaching English. That's a way forward as well that I just want to highlight, and part of your journey, this idea of, okay, yeah, if you don't want to sort of wander aimlessly and figure out all the things on the fly and go from country to country and all that, there's maybe a time and place for that. But maybe applying to one of these sort of experiences, jobs that require you to travel or relocate to a different place or another country, you have the built-in income, you have the infrastructure, you have a period of time that you have blocked out where, okay, I'm going to be in Spain for X amount of months or whatever it is. Not to mention the permission and things like that with the visas. So yeah, I just think this, through the example you just shared, I just wanted to pull that out for listeners and remind them, is this hitting their ears? Is that something for you right now? Is that something you've considered? And I've seen that at all ages, I know you're younger, but, I've seen people that are, middle-aged, do seasonal work in some place, or, you know what I mean? So that kind of thing is open for a wide swath of people.
Absolutely. I've volunteered and I've, worked with people of like all different ages. I think someone in my cohort that was in the English teaching assistant program with me at the same time was way older than the rest of us and just kind of like worked their career and taken a period off and was wanting to do something different. And it still is things that are gaining experience. It was the first time that I'd like been in a classroom putting lessons together, and I had nannied, I had like done homework with kids, I had done different things, but this was such a different experience. And so it still gave me, all of this knowledge about like how to function as a teacher in a classroom.
Yeah, it's like you're out of your comfort zone, You're like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I gotta figure this out.
I'd never stood in front of a classroom. And at that point, my Spanish wasn't that great either. And so it's like and these kids didn't speak any English, barely. And so there was a level of like figuring out how to make it fun for them, have it be retained. What lessons were they going to be receptive to? What lessons weren't they? And there was a lot of learning through that whole process and connecting with the other, teachers that I was working with. There's so much to that experience. And so it's definitely worth exploring like other ways that things can be done as well. And happy to share like the links to this program and the au pair websites that I used if people are interested in exploring it more. But the program itself is 6 to 8 months long, and you're part-time. So you're doing like 10 to 12 hours a week in the classroom. And it depends on where in Spain you are. But at that point, we got a monthly stipend of like 700 euros, which doesn't sound like much, but living in the south of Spain was actually quite sustainable and was enough to live really comfortably. So yeah, I was in different classrooms, like a science class. I was specifically in an elementary school, and we would rotate every 2 months where I would do like the older kids, like 6th and 5th grade, and then 4th and 3rd grade, and then 2nd and 1st. And so it was really interesting to see like what different classes were receptive to, what different kids were receptive to, how they learned better. And honestly, I formed such great relationships with them and would play with them during recess, or it was my birthday and I came in and one class had like a bunch of cards that they'd written me and had made me like this cake. And it was so special to have those really like immersive experiences in another culture that I don't think I would have ever had in any other way.
Yeah. Wow. That sounds incredible. And I guess the part of what allowed this to happen was your initial decision to actually embrace the solo travel thing. And I know you touched on that, but we didn't really get to dive into it. I just want to hear your thoughts on solo travel for somebody listening who's, a lot of people have done it, but even if you've done it before, sometimes it can be intimidating to hop in again. Or perhaps you're somebody who's like, I don't know, solo travel. I mean, I'm a huge fan. We talk about it a lot on the show. I know there's a ton of information out there, but I like to hear the experience on the ground and your advice on, solo travel and your thoughts on it.
I love solo travel. I think my relationship with solo travel has evolved as well, because I think I noticed after some time of kind of just backpacking around, I was going back to places where I had already built community. So I had made some really amazing friends in Cologne in Germany, and I was finding myself going back there or going back to Madrid because I had friends from when I lived and au paired in Madrid, and found myself like frequenting places where I had already built community, which was then like kind of a tell to myself of like, oh, I'm needing and looking for people who like I already know. At a certain point, it kind of progressed to that. But I think now, like, I'm planning trips for next year through Georgia and Turkey that will be solo. And I'm excited to get back to that, because initially, I think solo travel is kind of like a muscle that you have to learn how to flex. I think it's something that's so terrifying in the beginning. And even still now, there is like a subtle fear. But as you do it more and more often, and as you continue through different countries and different experiences alone or with the people that you meet, because that was one thing I found, you're never actually fully alone unless you intentionally decide to be. Or, if you're staying in hostels, it's kind of hard to just not meet anyone or talk to anyone ever. So you're never quite fully solo, but it's it will always be one of my favorite ways to travel because it does allow, like what I said earlier, of listening to your intuition and allowing yourself to be guided by like, where do I want to go next? And you're not with another person to kind of decide those things for you or to collaborate on them. It's really up to you of like what it is that you're looking for, you know, and being able to kind of discover that and find that on your own. And it can be scary or stressful for those same reasons because you only have yourself to rely on when it comes to planning or figuring out what's next. But I would recommend it to everyone. I think that's your podcast, of course, has like preached it from the rooftops of you absolutely should. And my one thing would be that it doesn't have to be somewhere on the other side of the country. It doesn't have to be a one-way ticket to India. It can just be the next state over, the next country over, somewhere closer by on like a smaller few days, you know. But I truly believe everyone should at some point do something outside of their comfort zone alone, because I think that in itself teaches you so much.
So how does one, because you've mentioned a couple times kind of the relationship with anxiety. We're both from the East Coast, so maybe that's just built in. I don't know. It's just a byproduct of growing up on the East in the Northeast,
ingrained in our nervous system.
It really is in some ways. Damn you, anxiety! But you know, for those of you listening that you know have some tendencies towards anxiety, I mean, you obviously did these things. And getting out of your comfort zone, you know, that's one of the things, maybe perhaps the main thing for some people that you need to overcome, because there's a lot of anxiety around not knowing, right? That's like where a lot of the root of anxiety can come from. And when you embark on a one-way trip to India or whatever, you know, a new job, teaching English and all the cool, crazy things that you've done, you know, there's going to be certain anxieties that come with that. So what's your best advice for people that have a tendency towards, you know, feeling anxious about these things, to sort of find a way to quiet that voice and still move forward with the out of the comfort zone type of decisions?
Oof. Yeah, that's so real. I was that kid that like couldn't pick up a phone to order a pizza because the thought of like having to talk to a stranger like was overwhelming. Like my anxiety, for those just to understand, because you might be listening and be like, oh, my anxiety is so bad I could never, you know, like it's just completely inhibits me. But I really struggled, specifically socially, was the hardest part for me. And so this trip, or that initial trip and thereafter, was a lot of forcing myself out of it, but also finding practices. Like that trip to India kind of set me up for like, okay, I know how to ground myself. And I think meditation has been a huge outlet, and it's still what I use to this day, to the ability to kind of like sit down and not quiet my mind, because I think that's what a lot of people interpret meditation to be, but sit with all the thoughts that are going on. And I think when you're able to build that awareness around all of the thoughts that are happening, you can kind of recognize which ones maybe aren't true, or like hear the story that's kind of happening in your head of like, oh, no one's going to like you when you go into that hostel, and you're not going to be able to make any friends, or da da da. And then walking yourself through it of like, okay, I'm going to sit with this. I'm going to meditate through this. I'm going to breathe through this. I'm going to reframe it. So it's like, I actually am a really social person, and I'm confident in my ability to make friends and be social. And then you go and you prove those thoughts wrong, I think is such a key part of being able to like walk into the hostel common area and talk to people and make friends and make connections. And now I have people that I'm going on this hike with tomorrow. So like being able to hold yourself through all of it, through meditation, through reframing, but then the piece of doing the hard thing and reframing it and seeing the kind of fear dissipate or the anxiety dissipate with proof in the action. I hope that makes sense, where it's like you're proving yourself wrong or proving those thoughts wrong consistently. And an exercise that I've done recently too is like, maybe you're not a meditator. but you like to write and you journal, sitting there, even if it's in like the note section of your phone, and the thoughts that are coming up, the anxiety that's coming up in the scenario, and then reframing it, but not what you say to yourself, because sometimes it's easier to do it externally, what you would say to a friend who's thinking all of these same thoughts, and of obviously a lot of the times we're a lot more gentle with the people that we love around us than we are with ourselves. So if that's the way you need to reframe it, then doing it that way. But just, it's a constant, and it can be exhausting because you're doing it over and over and over again. But I think once you have enough proof, like you've done the thing, even if it is the small weekend trip alone, it's like, oh, you gain so much confidence in that. You're like, oh my goodness, okay, I did that. Okay, maybe I could leave the country for a week on my own, or I could do X, Y, and Z, or I could, you know what I mean? And so you build up that confidence over time with experience, but it does start with the practice of like knowing what's going on in your head, being able to sit with it, journal through it, and hold space for it and reframe it, and then proving to yourself through action that you can actually do the hard things. Because in all of the traveling that I've done, all the experiences that I've had, anxiety has been so present. But I would have been, and life would have looked so different if I hadn't kind of pushed myself to work through it and get to the other side of it in order to experience what I've been able to experience. And sometimes it just requires that, of holding yourself through it until you get to the other side of it.
Wow, that's great advice. Thanks for sharing and being so transparent about it. It's it's a common thing. I feel a lot of people, and maybe it's not talked about as much when it comes to travel, but this goes a little bit back to something you alluded to before about sort of like some of these lifestyles, like the nomadic lifestyle, for example, can be idealized online. With all the online stuff, it's just so easy to sort of paint this picture of, we're living this lifestyle and, quick cut, I'm here, quick cut, look at me, all this stuff. You're not getting the anxious moments. You're not getting the deeper conversation around and advice like you just shared. That's super helpful. Especially the idea of talking to yourself as if you were talking to a friend, because you would never tell a friend like, you suck, you're not going to talk to anybody in this hostel, you're not going to make friends. Like, nobody would ever say that to their friends.
Exactly.
Yet we will do that to ourselves, and I don't know why. It's just part of the human condition, I guess. But those were great tools.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately. And part of the East Coast upbringing now.
We're like the anxiety's kind of built in, especially living in New York now. You kind of see it all around. So yeah, definitely built in a little bit.
Well, you're back in New York, and we can talk about you settling down, but I just had a thought on a question, because a friend of mine who's a former guest, his name's Eric Weiner, and he has this concept of things called soul places. And I'm wondering if New York City is that for you? And if not, what are some other places around the world that you would maybe call a soul place, a place where you feel sort of connected to in a different way? These aren't necessarily travel recommendations, by the way. This is just a very personal kind of thing, They can be that, though, too.
Yeah, I feel so tied. I think we've all had that experience where we just kind of show up somewhere and are immediately like, oh my God, this place fills my heart and my soul. Yes. And that are so magical. I think this is definitely a recommendation, but Bariloche in Argentina, there was one specific hostel that I stayed in called Indomito. And it's a little outside of the city of Bariloche and a little bit more remote. And it's across from this water. And I had the most beautiful experience there. It's just an incredibly beautiful place. And it's this little oasis, this home that's kind of been converted into a hostel. And there's a lot of locals there working and volunteering. And it was such a connective experience. There's so many hikes close by that can be done. And of course, if you've been, Argentina is incredibly breathtaking. The mountains are insane. And it was just such a connective place that I found to be really beautiful. And that's why, like I said earlier, spirituality, you can experience it anywhere you're traveling. It's in all of it, especially if you're out in nature. So I think there specifically was transformational and beautiful. Also doing the W Trek in Chile, in Torres del Paine. I'd never seen anything like it. That was somewhere that I felt so just connected to the earth, like feeling so disconnected from everything else, not having service and being a bit more remote. It was incredibly beautiful. And I think somewhere just that I feel soul tied to is Spain. I think because I was there during so many transformational points of my life, during transformational years, and spent a lot of time there. And that's where I really like learned Spanish and made friendships and still have people that I'm connected to there after years of having moved away. It's always somewhere. I was just there somewhat recently over the summer in Barcelona for Pride and celebrating Pride there with some friends. And every time I go back, I immediately like feel connected. I think we all have that place where you just enter and it's like a deep breath, a breath of fresh air when you're in that country, that you feel just so connected to. So I think Spain is definitely one of them. And I'm planning to go back to Thailand and Vietnam beginning of 2026, which I'm really excited for because I haven't been since that initial trip when I was 23. So it's been a long time to kind of reconnect and see what it feels like to be there now, like to immerse myself again, or maybe in a different way because I'm traveling with a partner there now. So it'll look different. But I think there's something really special about like revisiting places and experiencing it for a second time and the feeling that you have with you're there. And it's yeah, those are some places that I think have been really feel like soul places for me.
Cool. I'm going to ask you for some hidden gem recommendations as well in a minute, but I'm curious about your move to New York City because you transitioned out of the nomadic life and you settled down. I wanted to hear some thoughts around that. And also, from what I hear, it sounds like you've had some incredible experiences and you personally place a lot of value on, some of these nature experiences you have, being close to the earth, some of the things you've sort of mentioned during this conversation, yet you're in New York City, which is, a huge metropolis, which connects you to humanity in a very visceral way, but doesn't necessarily connect you to nature. So I'm just wondering, and I'm a huge fan of New York City and cities in general, but living in a New York City is different than experiencing in New York City. I'm just curious about your decision to settle there. Was it more professional? Is there family? Can you talk about that a bit?
No, of course. It's so funny. The contrast is stark and alarming at times, honestly. No, I had initially knew that I wanted a base and I was kind of trying to figure out where I wanted that to be. And when I initially moved, I was still with a previous partner who was based in New Jersey. And I think it was like a close enough. I knew I didn't want to go back to Jersey. That was for sure. But I was like, Brooklyn was close enough. And so last summer I sublet for a summer to kind of feel it out. And I really loved it. And I think what I'd kind of missed out on a lot in my travels, which I'd found in different places, like being in Sao Paulo and celebrating Pride there and connecting to other queer people, and then also doing the same in Barcelona, and connecting with different queer people, like through my travels, I realized I was really missing like a solid queer community. And I think when I first did that first sublet in Brooklyn, I found a lot of that. And I was like meeting other people. There was a lot of spaces that felt so safe and welcoming. And I really wanted to lean into that. So I think I'd spent a lot of time traveling and meeting so many amazing people and connecting with nature. But I think wanting a more stable community, that I could tap into on a daily basis, or people that weren't transient and moving from here to there, or me not being transient and being able to like really establish relationships.
You're like, I'm going to see this person again. I know, because they live right down the block.
Like incredible. Like I can walk to my closest friends' houses now, and we can meet up for coffee, or we can co-work together, or we can do these things that I didn't really have access to for a large portion of my life while I was traveling. So that became such an important thing that I was looking for. And I think I've realized as I've gotten older and my travels look different, or have begun to look different, that a little bit of that priority has changed. And so now prioritizing more immediate community that I can tap into on a daily basis and have access to, versus kind of meeting new people constantly here and there and all over the place. And I think they're both beautiful for different reasons, but it was just me needing something else. So that was kind of the biggest draw to here specifically. And there's such a large lesbian community. There's so many lesbian and sapphic spaces here that it's kind of easier to tap into that community here. And I know it exists all over the world, but there was something about finding it here in Brooklyn. And I think I can find the lack of nature a little challenging, but I've done a lot of like camping and excursions and things on long weekends with friends, or even this weekend I'm going to Virginia to go camping for a long weekend as well. And so
You get your fix.
I do find ways to kind of get my fix. And I think I know also that New York isn't a forever home. I think I do definitely crave moving abroad again at some point, or moving out of the States. And I don't really know like what that'll look like or when, but I think in like to find that through line again of intuition, I think it's one of those things that I'll just wake up one morning and I'll know that it's kind of time to move on to the next place. Because as beautiful and incredible and magical as New York is, it's a hard place to live and the cost of living is high. And so definitely not sustainable forever, but definitely a beautiful place to be for right now. So
That's great. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. I just want to pull 3 sort of practical tips out from that story, because I think that if anybody's listening and if they're on the cusp of maybe deciding on a big trip, but they're like, well, what am I going to do afterwards? Or going nomadic or something like that. Or maybe somebody's listening and they are nomadic and they're like, what am I going to do afterwards? That's a bit of a template. I think what you shared. I mean, first of all, the idea of prioritizing the community you want to be around is narrows it down. And then the subletting thing, I did the exact same thing. I actually subletted from friends of mine when I was trying to get off the road, and they were just getting on the road for the first time. And so rented out their place in Colorado for like 6 weeks. And it was a great way to just test out, hey, I've loved this and I've idealized this place as a traveler. And I think it's my soul place, but what's it really like to be here for more than a week or two? And so you can get that without the full commitment. And then the last thing you shared is that, you're like, well, this is, this might not be forever. And that mindset of just like, it doesn't have to be forever. You can also switch. I think those things are practical / empowering for those that have anxiety around what am I going to do afterwards?
Yeah. Give yourself some time to experiment with a place. If you're feeling a draw somewhere and you're like, okay, I want to see if this is going to work, give yourself some time to try it. Even if you're subletting your place, you don't want to pack up everything and leave completely. You're like, okay, I can sublet my space and go there for a month and see how it feels. And sometimes you realize like that's not what you were looking for. I tried that same thing in Costa Rica and I was supposed to stay for 6 months and ended up staying for like 2 or 3 because it wasn't the place. So also being gentle with yourself as you're kind of maybe figuring out what that looks like, and gather data is kind of what I like to call it. Like look at all of this as data gathering of like, oh, I tried that. I liked it for this reason. I didn't like it for that reason, and take that with you into the next experience or place until you find what it is that you're looking for.
Love it. Okay. Can you share 3? We always love hidden gem recommendations. And I'm going to preface this with the idea of, it's not necessarily your favorite places, but places that you think like, why aren't more people paying attention to these places? This is sneaky cool. I didn't really have many expectations going in, and now here I am. And this is just dope. Like
specific, like maybe small towns or cities,
sure,
or
anything. I'll leave it open. Country, cities, specific small towns,
I'm actually, okay, I'm going to do this a little differently.
Okay.
I'm going to give
different.
some hidden gems locations here in Brooklyn. If you're ever visiting places that I would highly recommend coming to. Yeah. So one of my favorite places around here is Lunaticos, it's called. And it's it's actually a beautiful way of incorporating travel actually here, because they have a bunch of bands that can be international and come in from different places that play live music. And it's a really kind of small space, but it's such a beautiful experience. to come and just see the live band. They're always incredible. Some of them can be international, like I said. So highly, highly recommend Lunaticos in Bed-Stuy. Kind of along the same vein, or Anthology is another place that I really like here if you're ever in Brooklyn and looking for live music. Really, really enjoy it. And if you're here and looking to explore kind of the queer scene a little bit, one of my big recommendations I love is a bar called Boyfriends, but they throw different queer events going on all the time and is a really like a community space, honestly, to come and connect with other people. So if you find yourself in Brooklyn and New York, I think a lot of people travel here and maybe sometimes look for things to do that isn't the typical thing to do in New York. Some of those spaces are really some of my favorites. So a little twist to what you were asking, but those are some recommendations.
I love it.
Here.
No, that's great. I'm glad you went in that direction. Most people that are travelers are going to visit New York at some point. And I mean, living there, you almost get to live the travel lifestyle in a way because it's so culturally diverse. I mean, it's an incredible place to be as somebody coming off the road. You're still traveling in a way.
That was honestly the draw, where it's like you could go to a different borough, or you could go to Queens or go to a different neighborhood and really like experience, Tibetan food, or like there's everything under the sun here. And there's so much range, and just hearing, like I walk down the street every day and hear different languages all over the place still. So that was one of the biggest draws as well, where I was like, where's somewhere where I'm not going to get bored, or there still is this constant exploration, and it's here. It's never ending. So if you are looking to settle somewhere that still allows you to tap into so much travel, I think it's the perfect place.
Amazing. Okay, do me a favor. Also send those links over for the hostel you mentioned, Bariloche, and some of these places in Brooklyn, just so we have it all collected in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before we make this announcement, which we're going to in a minute, I wanted to ask you, did we miss anything important that you wanted to highlight? I mean, I know we could talk a lot more about, building up a freelancing career and all that. Maybe we'll do a part 2 where we do that kind of stuff. But, based on sort of the evolution of the travel lifestyle and some of the topics we hit on today, was there anything that you feel like we missed that you just wanted to highlight before we let you go?
I think travel has looked so different for me and has evolved, and we kind of tapped into the different ways that I've done it and also what it looks like now. And we've said this a little bit, but I really want to reiterate, because I think it's so easy to kind of compare yourself to what someone's doing on Instagram and how long they've been traveling and how many countries they've been to. And I just really want to reiterate that like your experience is yours, and it doesn't need to look like everyone else's. And even if it's a couple weeks out of the year and it's not full-time travel, or it is full-time travel, whatever it looks like, it all counts. Because I think there's a big identity shift that I had to go through when I stopped traveling full-time, of like, that was who I was. That was all of me. Like I was a full-time traveler, and then coming to terms with not being that, or not introducing myself as that. I was like, who even am I now, and really having to grapple with that myself, and realizing like my whole identity didn't need to be wrapped up in that. And yours doesn't either. Technically, that doesn't have to be everything about you. It can just be one of the things that you love the most to do. But really harping on the fact that travel can look different for everyone, and your experience is your own, and remembering that, because part of the anxiety can be comparing sometimes, and so not getting stuck in that trap.
Oh, I'm getting chills, because you truly are the perfect person for what I'm about to announce. I mean, as you can hear, Dianni's a beautiful soul, and I love that you finish with that, because that captures a lot of the spirit of who you are and what you believe in, and acceptance and self, and just, there's so much there. And also, that's a big theme of this show. A lot of the things you talked about today, that's part of the ethos of this show, which is why I have asked you to join the Zero to Travel Host Collective, which is a small group of hosts that are coming in to bring you even more content, more diverse perspectives, more, a different approach than I can bring. We all have our unique approach to interviewing and what we share related to travel and life and all of those things. And I thought, well, this would be a great opportunity for you, the listener, to get to know Dianni here. As I mentioned, her podcast before, While She's Away podcast, and I started listening to that, and I said, man, I dig Dianni's vibe. Like I think she's perfect for this. And lucky us, you agreed to come on and do some shows here as part of the Host Collective, hosting some of the Zero to Travel episodes, bringing on some guests that you're curating. And I couldn't be more excited, especially as you were finishing with that. That was like, that just kind of said it all. So anyway, super excited. I want to say thank you and welcome. And
Thank you.
More people will be hearing a lot more from you.
Thank you, Jason. Honestly, this has felt so full circle to me because before that first initial trip to India, your podcast was the one that I was binging, and it was helping me through my anxiety at times and getting me so excited for this new adventure that I was going to embark on. And so I'm so excited to now be able to be a part of that and, bring on guests and talk about my experience and talk about queer travel or different things. And yeah, it feels like a full circle moment, and I'm really excited to join the team, and I think it's going to be awesome, Jason. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and I didn't know that, by the way. That's not how you ended up. I didn't know you were listening to my podcast when you were, planning these travels and stuff. That was like an unexpected surprise. I so appreciate it, and I'm really excited just as a fan of yours to get to listen to the episodes. And, that's part of the intention here too. It's, well, let's broaden the perspectives. Let's get a different take. Let's give people even more travel in different ways from through different lenses, through each individual that's going to be part of this Host Collective, which it's small. That's coming along down the pipe here in the feed. I'm super excited about it. Yeah, it's just important in travel to just try to kind of like open things up even more. And I think nowadays with short form content and the snappy videos and the quick cuts and the hype music and all the stuff, we're going to keep doing what we do here, which is having in-depth conversations, keeping it real. And that's exactly what you've been doing on your show. And that's what you're bringing to the table here. So I appreciate your honesty and just, putting yourself out there and who you are. And I'm just really excited. So thanks for agreeing to do it.
Thank you. The long form content is valuable. Like you said, we got into a conversation about anxiety and managing anxiety while traveling, and those aren't always things that you see in the short form snippy things. So I know and trust that the conversations you're having and I'll be having here on the podcast are impactful and helpful and meaningful and are still what we need, even with the plethora of short form content that's out there. So I'm excited.
Cool. Well, look out for those episodes coming down the pipe, and we will link up to your Instagram, your podcast, and some of the things we mentioned in the show today. Should I just turn over hosting duties to you right now? You want to wrap this one up, Dianni? You got a quote? You got a quote or something you want to leave us with? I mean, you already left on a high note. Then I came in and made this big announcement. Now I'm putting you on the spot to leave us on a high note again. Totally unfair. No, we'll just let you go. We'll let you get about your day. But I do appreciate your time and look forward to, as a fan, listening to some of the shows that you have coming in the feed here.
Thanks so much.
All right, take care. There you have it. Thank you very much to Dianni Hall. I'm so excited to have her on board the Host Collective. As you heard, we are building out the Zero to Travel feed to feature even more perspectives, more interviews, just different things that can help you travel the world on your terms. And I'll still be doing interviews, but of course, I just wanted to add more into the mix for you, the listener here. And this show, to me, is bigger than one person. It's about focusing on the stories that empower, that inspire, that give you the practical tips and the practical knowledge, as well as sort of the inspiration and the motivation to get out there and either keep traveling the world, start traveling the world, or just do the things you want to do in life, really, at the heart of it. And I hope it serves that purpose. So if you have any guest recommendations, you have recommendations for the show, particular content you want me to cover or one of the other hosts to cover, drop me a line. Jason@zerototravel.com is my email. And of course, the best way to stay in touch off the pod, zerototravel.com/newsletter. I'll leave you with this quote in a second. First, just some personal updates. It's always interesting to settle into a new year, isn't it? I mean, it's like you're coming off the holiday thing and you're trying to find your feet. You're like, all right, well, I got, I don't know if you're like me, have some goals, some aspirations, sort of the fresh start. It's like hitting reset on the game console, right? You're just like, okay, well, I have this whole blank slate ahead of me. How am I going to fill it? That's an important question. And, you can read a million articles about why you should have New Year's resolutions, why you should set goals, and then you can read a million other articles about why you shouldn't set goals, and that's a bad thing, and everything in between. That's the blessing and the curse of the internet, right? Ultimately, I think we kind of just got to do what is right for us. One of the things I do each year is I pick a word that is going to be a theme. Usually the word doesn't stick. Sometimes halfway through the year, I even forget it. But I just thought, well, I might as well start the year with that anyway, doing the best I can here. So my word for the year is zest, as in a zest for life. I think not that I've lost that, but I want to keep that top of mind. I think that's really wrapped up and tied in with gratitude, and zest is just a fun word. So, having fun, having that zest for life. And even though sometimes we have the mundane routines where we get up and we have to do certain things, and maybe it's a gray day and maybe, you're not feeling so great. But for me, that word pops up in like all caps with like sparkles around it and glitter and whatever. And it's just like zest. It's like, okay, something I can sort of hang my hat on each day. So if you haven't picked a word for the day, or for the year, then go ahead and give it a try. Just an experimental thing. Give it a go. If you have, I'd love to hear what your word is. You can drop me a line and let me know. And, a lot going on in the world, and most of it, none of us can control, most of the big things. So we can focus on what we can control and how we think about things, how we think about people. And I don't want to make this rant too long, but, it's an interesting time. It can be a tough time in many ways, but we need each other as humans. We need each other. So let me leave you with a quote. I always like to turn towards the unbelievably unfathomable universe to put things in perspective. That the scales of time, the scales of the universe, always just, for me, physics and the universe and some of those really big things that we can forget in our day-to-day, like there's a burning ball of fire just keeping us alive and things like that. It kind of helps me maintain perspective and in some ways remain positive. And that's why I thought this quote was good to wrap this one up on that note, kicking into the new year and zooming way out and keeping the big picture in perspective, but also tying in with the theme of the travel, evolution and evolution. Things change and evolve, and I thought this one would be a great way to end it, from Carl Sagan, who said, "We are the representatives of the cosmos. We are an example of what hydrogen atoms can do given 15 billion years of cosmic evolution." Thanks for listening, and see you next week. Peace and love to you and yours. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by ZeroToTravel.com. Ideas and advice to make your travel dreams a reality.